Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for Monday the 25th of April, and joining me on this edition are Mark Botwright.
You're going to make my boys look bad.
News editor Mark Hodgkinson.
Nobody digs your music but yourself.
Audio reviewer Ed Selley.
Your music makes no sense to no one but yourself.
And assistant editor Steve Withers.
Ladies and gentlemen, the revolution.
I don't remember any of those lines from Ant-Man. Was that not the film that we're quoting from?
That was the director's cut.
All right, okay. Right, so we kind of joked about it last week, about 2016 being a bad year for celebrity deaths, and yet another two massive profile celebrities have passed on. And do you think we should be starting at Deadpool? I know it's not in very good taste, but
I joked about that when I sent out this running order yesterday morning, and by the afternoon I was thinking I wish I'd put Prince on my Deadpool because he popped his clogs within 4 hours of me making a joke about it. It's becoming distressingly common now for every week, expecting to hear about some other high celebrity profile.
I think there's a lot of them going into hiding, trying to hide from 2016. Yeah, it's quite sad actually. I mean, so two big names there. I mean, Prince, I never really liked his music. I never kind of got him, but I do appreciate that he had a massive fan base. Certainly when I was at high school, he was the hot thing at that moment in time. And although I never got into him, I do appreciate that, you know, he had a big following, and for his style of music and what he did was quite influential, Ed.
He was absurdly talented. I it's a bit different for me. I like you. I mean, I wouldn't describe him as an artist that is in my top 10. But my brother has been a tremendous fan for years and years and years, and that has an effect. You sort of listen beyond perhaps the stuff you sort of know by reputation, and yeah, you like it or be indifferent to it. Impossible to argue with the fact that he was absurdly talented. Last night, I stuck a YouTube video in the memorial thread that's currently lurking in the general chat forum. At the George Harrison Memorial concert, he was in a lineup of musicians who did a sort of mass rendition of While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And he just makes them look like people getting ready for their grade 1 exam. It's just extraordinary. And, you know, in terms of skill as a multi-instrumentalist, as a songwriter, as a showman, and as a live performer, he was absolutely in the top drawer. I have to say, I'm not so surprised by this as I have been by some other unfortunate celebrity deaths this year, in so much as Prince had been as regular as clockwork in terms of live performances and so on and so forth, and he'd cancelled 4 on the bounce, which is really unusual. And then obviously he'd been hospitalised a couple of days previously. So whilst there's not quite the sense of outright shock, there is a massive sense of loss. And I'm going to shamelessly steal a thought from Mark Craven and a couple of rest of us, whilst we were all sharing an office many years ago, were discussing the hypothetical meeting of Warner Brothers executives the first time they would have heard the Tim Burton Batman soundtrack that Prince had written for them, because it probably wasn't what they had in mind, but it's absolutely fantastic. And you know, I just like the idea of that, and yeah, I think it's a massive loss.
Anybody else a Prince fan on the podcast?
Not a massive fan. I had a couple of his records. I had Sign of the Times and I had Purple Rain. And I had another one. What was on with Raspberry Beret on it? I can't remember. Paisley Park, I think it was. I wouldn't describe myself as a huge fan. He was a bit hit and miss, but I think that was because he was so diverse. He attempted lots of things and wasn't afraid to try new stuff. And yeah, he was amazing, really. But
he was also insanely prolific, wasn't he? I mean, yes. To the point where he basically fell out with Warner Brothers because they preferred the more traditional approach, which is, you know, you do an album, you tour the album, a couple of years later you do another album, you tour that album, and there's sort of you build up demand for the next album. He was sticking them out a couple a year, and they were going, we don't want too much content, we don't want this many albums, which is one of the reasons why he started falling out with them, started calling himself the artist formerly known as Prince, and having that silly little symbol and all that sort of stuff going on. Yeah,
and apparently there's as much unreleased material again.
Oh well, yeah, he was absolutely ridiculously prolific. I mean, and like Mark said, now he wouldn't always, he threw so much stuff at the target. Some hit, some didn't, but he was just unbelievably prolific. I mean, there is as much unreleased material as there is released material, and there's a staggering amount of released material as it is. So if you're a Prince, I mean, the problem is if you're a real Prince fan, and like me, if I'm into a band or an artist, I have to have everything I've ever done. Like Bowie, I've got every single thing he's ever released. That could be really expensive if you were a Prince fan because you'd have to put so much stuff.
Well, I mean, my brother spent a fairly hefty sum when he did the tour, the last set of tours in the UK. I think my brother went to see him 3 times, including one spur of the moment, tout it up, pay a fortune one. So yeah, I think that there's a degree of compulsion that goes into it. But yeah, it is a shame. But incidentally, I mean, whilst I don't doubt that there'll be the inevitable lift in pricing that comes with an artist dying, the plus side is that across both CD and vinyl, Prince sold a lot of albums. So if you suddenly decide you want to revisit it and you don't want to fork out for the Tidal sub, because I think that's the only streaming service he's on, it shouldn't be too expensive to avail yourself of most of the classics. Obviously, if you're like Stephen, you need the rarities as well. You'll need to dig deep, but for most normal people, you should be able to get the classic albums without too much expenditure.
I'm afraid he's one of those artists that kind of just went by, and I never really kind of got into, so to speak.
The only thing, presumably, that you remember is from Jay and Silent Bob.
I was going to say that's my reference point.
Morris Day and the Time, and so on and so forth.
Actually, if you get a chance to listen to Kevin Smith's. I was going to call it stand-up, but it's more when he does his evenings with, and he basically just talks and tells stories. But yeah, his story about being asked to shoot a documentary about Prince at Paisley Park is hysterical, absolutely hysterical. So if you get a chance, check that out. It's really funny because basically, somehow, even though he was supposed to sign a non-disclosure agreement, he never actually did get around to signing it, and therefore could tell these fantastic stories about what it was like being inside the Prince inner circle. Quite why Prince wanted Kevin Smith, of all people, to shoot a documentary, I don't know, but it never got released anyway, but it is funny, really funny.
He was a huge fan of Dogma, although given that Prince was deeply religious, it would appear that he was fine.
But so is Kevin Smith. That's the irony. I mean, Kevin Smith's Dogma isn't an attack on God or Jesus per se. It's an attack on organised religion, which maybe Prince duck. But Kevin Smith is very religious, unbelievably, despite his potty mouth. He is a deeply religious Catholic, amazingly, and made Dogma.
And talking of funnies, we also lost Victoria Wood earlier in the week.
Yes, that meant that both my mother and my brother have been at various stages this week extremely upset. Again, that was a bit because she was on the Celebrity British Bake Off, the Comic Relief one, last time round, and she looked fine. So yeah, that came a bit out of the blue. And a bit of a shame, really. She was comes under the heading of a treasure, sort of in the classic British vein of people that managed to be. And all power to Victoria Wood. She managed to be pretty amusing without immediate recourse to either being incredibly rude or just talking about her genitals. So that was quite something. And she actually wrote some fantastic songs as well.
I was going to say as a lyricist, she was really, really, really talented.
Yeah, she was talented. I mean, comedian, musician, lyricist, incredibly talented. And what struck me is how young both of them were. 62 and 57. That's not old, is it, these days? No. That's too young to be going. Too young.
That's just because you're hitting 50.
Well, next year. Yeah.
Old man.
Hopefully I fall into the Keith Richards school of basically I've lived my life so badly that I'll live forever.
Well, I did stick on Facebook last night. What odds would you have got on January the 1st, 2000 on a spread bet that Shane McGowan and Keith Richards
still going strong
would outlive Prince and David Bowie? But that's. It's a bit of a shame. I mean, also regrettably, I think we'll probably have Morrissey for another 70 years. Let's face it, he doesn't drink, smoke, eat meat. He's probably.
I saw some more bad news on Facebook this morning. Kanye West has been found alive and well in his apartment.
Can I just say, Kanye West is undoubtedly a massive, massive tit of a man, but actually he has done some cracking albums. Really, really good albums.
I've got to
You
say,
have to separate the man. You have to separate the arsehole from the music there.
I did
but
discover
you
that
do.
I quite like a lot of his songs.
Yeah.
Unknowingly.
Yeah, so do I.
I have to say, I didn't realise they were by him. I thought, oh, I really like that song. Well, that's Kanye West. Oh, dear.
Yeah. So it's annoying. He is a he is a tit, but he's actually quite talented.
And while we're sticking with death, there was just one other one that kind of stuck out this week, and that was Guy Hamilton, Steve, who was one of the early directors on the James Bond films.
Yeah, absolutely. He directed Goldfinger, the quintessential Bond movie. Basically set the template for all the Bond films to come after that. Also directed Diamonds Are Forever and Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun. So he did 4 Bond films in total, second only to John Young in terms of number directed by a single person. And a lot of other great films too. I mean, he was a very talented filmmaker. I mean, in his case, he was in his mid-90s, so fair enough. But still sad to see him go. I think any Bond fan will say, if you're listing your top 3 Bond films, Goldfinger is going to be in the top 3 of anyone's list.
So that's Prince.
Sadly, 2 big names there that again we've lost in 2016. It's been a terrible year if you're a celebrity.
And we're only 4 months.
And we've got 8 months to go, so
yeah.
Keep your fingers crossed, boys.
I'll have a Brucey bonus. Right, moving on. Current competitions, Mr. Botwright, please take us through them.
Okay, we've got Mad Max Fury Road on Ultra HD Blu-ray, and that one's open to active members until April the 28th. Labyrinth on just regular Blu-ray, and that one's open to all members, and that runs till 9th of May. And finally, we've got the Pump Audio Headphones Mega Giveaway, and that's open to all members until the 22nd of May.
Any previous winners?
None. That
Although,
damn none again.
Next week, we definitely will have a winner.
Is that a promise?
Well, because the 28th is the Mad Max competition, so yes, absolutely, definitely winner next week.
They just need to try not to die in the meantime.
Right, moving on, hardware news, and we've had a couple of 2016 TVs in this week, and I'm going to go to Steve first. So you've had the Panasonic, the DX750, so that's the model up from the one that Mark reviewed last week. Mark found a couple of issues on the 700. Did they transpire to be there on the 750?
They did not. Well, certainly not in the case of, I think Mark was commenting on 50 hertz motion handling and frame dropping or stuttering. And that was not the case with the 750, although the 750 uses better processing than the 700. 750 sits between the 700 and the 802, but it includes the HCX processing. And I think that definitely helps, because I didn't have any problems with the 902 either, and that also uses the same processing. So I would suggest it might be a problem specific to the 700, where it did perhaps not perform so well. And again, I think Mark picked up on this. Local dimming could have been better. There was initially it looked quite good. I had it on a low setting. Oh, yeah, that works quite well. But then I was watching an episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. where there were someone was being interviewed, and one person was in quite bright lighting, the other person was in a dark corner. And every time the camera cut from the bright lit person to the dark person, you could see the backlight going down slowly in the scene. It was very annoying, and I turned off the local dimming, watched the same scene again. It didn't happen, so it was definitely the local dimming that was doing that. As it happens, the native blacks on this VA panel are really good, and the backlight uniformity was good too. So in fact, to be honest, it didn't really need the local dimming. You still have a very good picture without using it. The only time when I did use it, because you kind of had to, was with HDR content. Now it's 500 nits peak brightness compared to, I think, just over 300 nits on the one you reviewed, Mark.
Yeah, 335, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I have learned so far, coming off the back of the KS9000 Samsung, which is 1,000 nits, over 1,000 nits peak brightness, you immediately realise that difference is noticeable in terms of how much the specular highlights really impact on the image. Yeah. It still looked good, but not as good. Also, the colour gamut isn't as wide on this TV. It doesn't, it's not as wide as some of the higher end models are in terms of their colour gamut coverage. But having said that, I thought it was a really, really good telly. Good, solid, all-round mid-range TV. Very accurate, particularly after calibration. Lovely, accurate picture. Really nice, accurate colours. Good grayscale performance. Good video processing in it. Like I said, no problems with stuttering or frame dropping. Excellent native black levels for an LCD television. quite decent sound. Got the Firefox platform, which I really like. Nice and simple, easy to use, but quite effective. Yeah, good feature set. It includes 3D, which is a bit of a rarity these days. And yeah, I think if you're looking for, and it's a good price point, £1,299 for the 50-inch that I was reviewing. So if you're looking for a well-priced, well-spec'd, good-performing mid-range TV that's got HDR included and 3D, this definitely should be on your shortlist.
Sticking with the Panasonic, you reviewed the UB900 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray player. Now in the shops, forum members have started getting them, but there seems to be, for some users anyway, issues with Atmos soundtracks. Yeah,
there's been reports of audio dropouts when watching either Blu-rays or Ultra HD Blu-rays with an Atmos soundtrack using the UB900. I have to say, I have not actually experienced this myself, and I specifically watched an entire Dolby Atmos film last night from beginning to end, just in case there were any dropouts. Didn't get any at all, but there have been quite a few reports from a number of different members. So at least I've read at least 5 or 6 people that have reported it. So it's not an isolated event, and they've gone through different setups, and we've tried different setups. So I don't think it's a setup issue necessarily. I don't think it's one person just not perhaps getting up properly. It seems to be a number of people on a number of different discs. So it's not specific to one studio. And it seems to be totally random. There seems to be no obvious reason for it. So it's a bit strange, but it's definitely a well-reported problem, unfortunately, which we've reported back to Panasonic and they're looking into. So, yeah, unfortunate that a player, this Ultra HD Premium and THX certified should manifest an issue so early on.
Yeah,
but as I say, unfortunately, I can't I haven't personally experienced it, and I have been, trying to find it, but it does seem to be very random in the way it happens. So the reason, I don't know.
I guess it's one of these things that is bound to happen when you got new tech, and gone are the days, I think, where certainly I remember going around Panasonic labs, probably 2009, 2010, I think it was, and they had every single make, model of TV and AV receiver. They had one room that just had all this kit in it, and they soak tested all their products. But I think the days of doing that and getting every single combination, and I think the biggest issue is HDMI.
Yes.
So being able to test all that and get all that together and test it properly with absolutely every combination, I think it's impossible anyway. So I think you're bound to see issues appear now and again. But I guess with technology these days, unless it's a hardware issue, which I don't think it would be, it should be fixable via firmware, hopefully.
Yeah, it's a strange one that it should be Dolby Atmos, though, given that's been around for a couple of years. You think if there was going to be an issue, it would be more related to the video side of things, which is obviously the new bit. But I guess hopefully it'll be fixable with a firmware update.
So moving on, and another 2016 TV, this time the XD93 from Sony, Mark.
Yes. I'm blown away with this TV. It's fantastic, really. There's very little to fault, which doesn't make writing the review any easier, but yeah, there you go. I've got the 55-inch model in, which cost you about £2,000, just a penny shy. It's got all the latest connectivity, 4 HDMI inputs. They're all 2.0A, HDCP 2.2. And there's I can't remember last year. I don't think I saw the top-end Sonys last year, Steve. What was the remote like? I know there was 2. They've got rid of the one-flick controller, which was rubbish.
I'm trying to remember now.
It's got a rubberized, it's got this soft kind of rubberized finish, which I don't remember from last year. It's quite nice anyway.
No, I think they've redesigned it. Actually, I think they've redesigned the remote for this year. It doesn't ring any bells with me either.
It's a lot better than what they used to send out. I'm quite impressed with that. I can't find any uniformity problems whatsoever on this TV, and which is really unusual for an LED. That the black screen uniformity is great. There's no panel banding. I've watched quite a bit of sport, snooker, football, cricket, and there's no panel banding, no DSE, which is really impressive. Very good native black levels. The dimming system is a lot better than the Panasonic's, that's for sure. It gets caught out now and again, but you can definitely leave it on. And in fact, I've got it on in mid rather than min, because it gives a really nice contrasty picture.
Is it really, really thin?
It is at the top, but then of course you've got to house the speakers and the connections. So I think it's just about a centimetre thin at the top, maybe 1.2 centimetres at the top, and it gets to 3.6, I think, down towards the bottom. It comes with its own wall mounting kit, its own special wall mounting kit, so you don't have to buy a bracket if you want to stick it on the wall. In terms of accuracy, it was pretty accurate out of the box in the Cinema Pro and Cinema Home modes. Just a little bit too much green in the grayscale. Colours were good. Well, actually, I'll say that. It tends to oversaturate at full saturation, so 100. This is on Rec 709, by the way. It's oversaturating a touch, but nothing noticeable, and then undersaturating on lesser saturation levels. But actually, when I calibrated it, it all just fell into place really well. Menus, when you're calibrating, are bloody hateful. They're awful. They pop up exactly where you don't want them, and they affect the measures completely. So you have to, it's in and out, in and out.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
A real pain in the arse.
Yes, but that's obviously not going to bother many people.
Not as bad as this time last year when the platform was still somewhat flaky, and not only did you have to keep going in and out, but half the time it didn't remember them anyway, or things would just change.
Yeah, actually, I did have that. It still does that to a certain extent.
Does it?
Yeah, it's forgotten my settings on one input. As Phil will see when he's going through the settings video, like, what's that? It's going, the settings disappeared. So I don't know exactly. I can't seem to nail that down because it's been okay apart from on this one input. But anyway, the menus sometimes take a little while to load, though. You know, like last year.
Yeah.
This is the picture menu now. The Android TV platform seems much more solid. It's nice and fluid, and I've not had any crashes, and everything loads nice and quick. They've had a bit of a redesign with the discovery bar, so it integrates Netflix, YouTube, iPlayer, and a few others, but actual useful things you want integrated into the recommendations. So that's really quite good.
The things that stood out for me, Mark, when I saw this last year was the little gold thing. The
little trim
runs around the trim. That stood out and looked quite nice. The other thing was, you've mentioned the wall bracket, which I thought was really nice, but the other thing was the cable tidy to the rear of the stand, where you can run the cables down the back of the stand and cover them over.
I was just about to mention that. I love that.
Yeah, I think
as someone who likes a tidy cable.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's a simple but effective cable management system with just something like a rubberized loops you stick your cables through, and then you've got detachable panels that you can stick over the back of the various connections to hide them away once you're all hooked up. That's a really nice touch. Moving on to the HDR performance, and that is fantastic. As we were just discussing, I had the Panasonic in before, which had peak brightness for about 335. This one, although it's not premium UHD certified, which is Sony's choice, I believe, to avoid customer confusion, it hits all the specs that would make it a UHD premium TV. I got, I think, 1,050 nits on a 10% window pattern. The PQ EOTF track's absolutely spot on right out of the box. It hits about 94%, 93, 94% of DCI. I can't remember what the Rec 20 was, 60 odd, I suppose 68. And the colours track reasonably well up to sort of 50, and then they tail off a bit in accuracy and in saturation levels on Rec 2020, but still it looks bloody good. Even some of the processing, I mean, we don't advise people to use most of the processing controls on board a TV, but if you want to have a play around just with the SDR material, the live color control is really effective. So is the extended dynamic range. It's kind of the pseudo HDR, and it's really good. I was watching Better Call Saul off Netflix, 4K Netflix, and I was having a mess around with the processing controls, and sticking that on mid and sticking live color on min, it really gave a really impressive image, and it didn't look fake or artificial. It looked absolutely excellent. The only thing that catches sometimes falls down is the dimming system.
Well, I was just going to bring this up because this is the thing Sony are making a big fuss about is their dimming system, and this is an edge-lit TV as well, which I'm kind of surprised with your HDR comments there with it being edge-lit. So obviously the dimming system is working to some extent there then.
It's working most of the time. It's just when it's got a big block of bright object against a dark background. On the smaller ones, you don't see anything. It's very fast. It's very fast to change. Not unlike the Panasonic. It's highly effective most of the time. You see it on credits. The blooming around credits movie credits I'm talking about, and menus and stuff, but not in general content. I've seen it fail. Well, not fail, but I've seen it caught out a couple of times, but only a couple of times, and I've given it an awful lot of viewing. In fact, I was dragged to bed by my wife at 2 a.m. on Wednesday morning because I just wanted to stay up and watch it because it's stunning, and that 1000 nits or 1000 nits plus in HDR, it makes a big difference. It really does. The content, I've watched the entirety of Kingsman again. I'm very well acquainted with that movie, and there's a line in there when right towards the beginning with one of the Eastern European baddies who's kidnapped. I can't remember what it was. I can't remember the plot because I've watched it so many times. And he gives him this very fine whiskey, and he says the line, "You will shit." And when you've seen the 1000 HDR, you will shit. I will tell you.
I love that. I just love that. That was actually the tagline for the advertising. HDR. When you see it, you will shit.
Yeah, that should be it. I was blown away. I was utterly blown away. Fantastic, really good.
I think it's impressive that they've. Because it is, I mean, obviously it's thicker at the bottom, but it's still an incredibly thin panel with the LEDs along the bottom, which is what they were using on the X90C last year. And that had massive problems with backlight uniformity and banding and columns of light and all the other stuff, which clearly they really worked hard to fix this year, judging by what you just said, Mark.
Yeah, they've really done a stunning job with it, and it's a gorgeous thing as well. I know we've touched on the design, but the build quality is superb, and it just looks lovely. And I'm not going to want to give it back. It's a great TV.
It's the XT94 then with its full array backlight.
Yeah, and it's 75 inches. That's going to be an absolute belter. You want to be pestering Sony for that, Steve. It's brill, absolutely brill. I know you've been a big fan of the high-end Sonys the last couple of years.
Well, the last year's X94C was well impressive. Yeah, that was a massively impressive telly. So, and I'm glad this year they've ditched those bloody great speakers.
That makes.
I think that's a definite step in the right direction.
Yeah, there'll just be as many people who are getting by that.
Yeah, I know, probably, but my God,
but isn't that the further proof you can't please everybody all of the time?
Oh yeah, totally.
And obviously they've made on balance, them removing the speakers would suggest that more people didn't want a hulking great set on them on the thing as did.
Yeah, I think they did look weird.
These days, you can't please anyone any of the time these days. But personally, the 75-inch last year with those speakers, it was insanely heavy and big. So obviously big with the screen, but that just made it even bigger. So I personally would be quite pleased to see the back of them.
Yeah, the sound quality is not bad either. It's not, it's a TV, but it's not bad at all.
Steve, you only left it once if you're an owner.
True. Mind you, you need to reinforce your wall, I think, if you're going to hang it on it.
To be fair, this is a point where you have to retain a sense of perspective as a reviewer.
Yeah.
I have a special hatred for loudspeakers, which are hard to get back in their boxes, and then I think actually I don't know how many people are ever going to rebox them, so I have to be sort of careful.
I say that is one thing with this Sony is I counted 13 bits of polystyrene I've got to reconstruct, and it's the most complicated packaging I've ever seen. So
I think it would make
photos of things when I've unboxed them.
I've done that, but it makes no sense.
They've got these stupid game shows on at the minute where the driving challenges and all that kind of thing and all the rest of it. I still maintain that one of the best game shows ever would be building an IKEA thing. Anything from IKEA, that's the challenge. You got to build it, or you've got to pack something back up.
TV back in
a box.
No.
Like
I'm sorry.
The final test.
The gold standard of this was the first Sony Net MD mini disc Walkman, the MZN1, and it wasn't. The thing is, it wasn't a test of physical strength, so it was open to all comers. But you could have basically watched it come out of the box 100 times, and you still couldn't either get all the parts back into the box, or you'd go, "Oh, this is going surprisingly well," and then you'd realise that there was a massive ream of instruction manuals or something like that still on the outside of the box. It was absolutely impossible. And it was a bit of a problem because anytime we opened one for a customer to see it at Ritter Sounds, it was like, oh yeah, this is now open box because we have no means of getting it back into its container. So that was the hardest thing I've ever encountered.
I forgot to mention in the DX750 review, it comes with this fairly unique stand that can be, you can have it in 4 different configurations depending on whether you want the feet towards the middle for a smaller footprint or at the edges, and also you can turn them around so there's a sort of a curved central circular stand or 2 curved feet at the edges, or you can have sort of forward pointing out feet in the middle or forward pointing out feet at the edges, and disassembling and reassembling those stands feet for each different configuration to sort of photograph and film them. It was like I had memories of using Meccano kits when I was a kid. You had to not only take the foot off, but then have to dismantle the column from the foot, work out which way around it goes back in again, and attach the foot back. It took bloody ages. But it is quite an interesting solution to the problem of, if you've only got a narrow equipment stand.
And again, Steve, normal people would only do this once.
True.
Oh, the plights of being a reviewer, eh?
Stuff at the bottom.
Stop me from being angry.
I did some gaming on it as well. But that felt all right. I've not measured the lag, actually. That's something I've got to get around to.
Was it the best game of Space Invaders you've ever played?
Yes. I was playing Rocket League, actually.
So, I mean, sticking with Sony and sticking with gaming, and we discussed this last week, and as always, Mark, when you come on the podcast and discuss gaming news, and certainly in the past this has been the case, as soon as you muttered the words, and before it even got to edit podcast, it was all out of date about the PS4K.
Yes, well, kind of all out of date in the sense that at least now we have what seems to be more solid information. This one comes via Giant Bomb, and then Eurogamer had the same information. Multiple sources supposedly give a code name for this, so we know it definitely does exist. Code name Neo, and some specs. So it now looks like, this is a thing. It's happening. It's going to get a bit of a boost in CPU, twice as powerful GPU, so it's getting a fair old bump. But there was no mention of a UHD Blu-ray drive, which was the kind of
VR, isn't it?
Well, yeah, this is the thing. The information at least puts people's minds at rest. So I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit of a cynic, but it kind of read a little bit like a controlled leak. That information came out. They're not really going to put out any exclusives for it, so it's not going to be a case of your PlayStation 4 is out of date, because one of the big kind of dangers would be that you annoy your existing customer base, that all of a sudden you release an updated model that plays better versions of games and different games. You don't want to kind of fragment the market there, but it's a big enough upgrade to show tangible benefits. Sits nicely in the middle, so it's not so extreme as to annoy those who've just purchased a PlayStation 4. It's going to have a base, it seems, of 1080p. It can't be any worse than performance-wise than the existing PlayStation 4. All games will come with a base mode and a Neo mode, so moving forwards, people can patch old games to take advantage of the increased power of the new hardware. And that's stipulated that it should start all games having this base mode and Neo mode from October. Now, obviously, the logical assumption would be, well, that's the time that it would release. The only reason why that might not happen is PlayStation VR is coming out in October, and it just seems like a bit of a strange thing to release two bits of hardware at the same time around the same price point, which surely, if you're a Sony fan, it would lead you to say, if you own a 4K set, make that decision, and you're going to cannibalize your own sales there. Other than that, it's really kind of just allayed a lot of fears that there's not going to be any exclusives. It's not going to, suddenly kind of fragment everything. But it's still leading some people to question whether perhaps is this the end of traditional console cycles? Are we heading towards, the iterative model like the phone market, where you just get constant refreshes as things get more powerful, and you can make them more powerful by just the efficiency of technology, things moving forward.
But then the PS3, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, you had the original release, and then there was about 3 or 4 different cases, was there not?
You had your different SKUs. You had the original PlayStation 3 FAT had, in essence, kind of a chipset from a PlayStation 2 in it to allow backwards compatibility and
SACD replay. Bizarrely,
I've still
and that
got
was
one
taken out though. So yeah, they've kind of different hard drives and things like this. We're used to, obviously, there being improvements. Larger hard drives has been the main one. Little incremental improvements. What people aren't used to is suddenly there being a version that is significantly more powerful and that will show actual benefits in gameplay. because this thing, even if you're on a 1080p set and you're not bothered at all about 4K gaming, and this thing won't, I'm hugely doubtful it'll ever hit 4K native resolution, but it should show you real benefits with regards frame rate. Most PlayStation 4 games anyway are hitting at least the 1080p mark, but for people who wanted this generation to be 1080p at 60 frames a second, they haven't seen that at all, and this could offer it.
Okay, well that makes sense. I guess the thing that sticks out there is obviously the UHD drive not being there. Do you think they might go the way of what happened with HD DVD and have a separate player?
No, I can't see them doing that, simply because then I just see that they'd be confusing people with too many boxes, with too much variation amongst their own product range. It seems like maybe it's just something that hasn't been leaked yet. It's not something that, shall we say, was confirmed as not being there. It could just be a fact that's been omitted. We haven't heard anything about, I don't think, about the hard drive in it either. So again, that could be upgraded. So it seems like maybe there are just some things still left in the air. I mean, we don't have anything solid. You'll have to wait for official word on this kind of thing. But conspiracy theory is that even though there are no exclusives, the fact that this thing is codenamed Neo and the PlayStation VR was codenamed Morpheus, that this is something designed to show the best advantage with PlayStation VR, and is a kind of necessary evil when seeing that maybe the existing PlayStation 4 was just underpowered to properly show off VR in comparison to what's being shown off on PC.
Mind you, we did say this last week as well about the UHD side of things and the UHD player. Sony are definitely going down the streaming route, and I know it was hinted at, Steve, that they would have a UHD standalone player from the home electronics side sometime in the financial year, but if you look at what Sony are doing in the US, everything 4K and HDR is being streamed at the minute to their TVs, and I guess it would make sense that the PS4 was more about streaming 4K content than playing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're even launching a 4K download service in the States, although it always seems to be in the States and never over here. I find it mildly amusing that Mark's just been eulogizing about the quality of Ultra HD Blu-ray HDR on a Sony TV, but Sony, the developer of Blu-ray, doesn't have a player. And it just seems like an obvious, easy win if you're going to do an upgrade of the PS4 to put a Ultra HD Blu-ray player or disc drive inside the console. But yeah, I just find it bizarre that they seem to be ignoring Blu-ray as an alternative and instead going for the download and streaming approach. Which reminds me, Mark, did you test out Netflix HDR on the Sony?
I did. So yes, I was doing a bit of that last night. Marco Polo, obviously.
Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to compare it to the SDR version yet, because that's a little bit complicated. But it looked great. But it looked great anyway in SDR. So I'm not convinced it's adding loads because of the quality of the SDR was so good. But I'll have to wait and see. I've not done extensive comparison. It was a quick 20 minutes. I wanted to finish off Better Call Saul, to be honest, because I wanted the last episode to watch.
Oh yeah, it's the last episode, isn't it?
Yeah, I watched the last episode last night, which was great. But that's a bit by the by. But yeah, it looked fantastic. That 15 minutes I watched, but I need to have a proper compare with the SDR version.
Yep. So getting back to the PS4K, it looks like it is a thing, and we just need to wait for more info. Is that right, Mark?
Yes, PS4K. You've got to wait for more info. Whether we'll see an Xbox 1.5, we'll wait for more info and see what Nintendo are doing next. So we're in a holding position now.
Okay, so the PS4K, will it happen? Will it not? Leave your comments in the podcast forum underneath this podcast. If it's something that, I guess with today's crossover, could you have one box that does it all? And would you want one that did it all? Interesting subject. Like moving on, and it's a movie. Now, is it reviews or news? It looks like it's news. So
still news. Yes,
still news. So we'll be back in a sec with movie news. Okay, Steve, so if we're going to the cinema this Friday, what can we see?
One of the big releases of the year, actually, Captain America Civil War. I'd say probably one of the most anticipated films of the last couple of years, because it's essentially grown into the Avengers 2.5, if you like. It contains almost the entire Avengers lineup aside from Thor and the Hulk, who will be appearing in a separate Thor movie. Thor Ragnarok, I believe it's called. So this is, as the name might suggest, based upon the Civil War comic book, although I think it's very different in terms of the film, certainly different in terms of the lineup of characters, because obviously some of the characters in the comic book are owned by the studio. So what we've got here is a Captain America sequel, which involves a large number of the Avengers, and basically they end up fighting against each other over an issue of whether they're going to register and control people with special abilities. So that's the general setup. What's interesting is that not only has the film got almost the entire Avengers cast in it, plus some new characters, but also famously Marvel have done a deal with Sony because The Amazing Spider-Man 2 did not do as well as Sony had hoped and cost a bomb. They've done a deal with Sony so they can have Spider-Man in the film. And then conversely, Marvel will also make for Sony a standalone Spider-Man movie called Spider-Man Homecoming, which is going to, they've described it as being more like a John Hughes movie. So it's going to be much about Spider-Man as a teenager and having doing things at school and high school and that sort of stuff. But that's going to be a standalone film. He's going to appear in this film as well. Plus Black Panther's going to be in this film. That's a new Marvel character to appear in one of their movies, setting up a Black Panther movie in I think next year. So it's a lot of characters in here. But what I have, and I've tried to avoid anything about the actual plot, but what I've read in terms of feedback, because there have been initial screenings and reviews being done, is it's really good. And it's directed by the same team, written by the same people that wrote and directed Captain America, the Winter Soldier, which I thought was absolutely superb. Probably the best comic book movie of the Marvel, certainly of the Marvel films, the best one so far. They were doing this. Apparently, it's really, really good. Because you're always in danger with so many characters, as is proved by Age of Ultron, the Avengers Age of Ultron. If you're juggling so many characters, you can lose the plot. But apparently, this is focused and exciting and well made and really good. So I'm really looking forward to it, actually. I think it's going to be one of the big. Obviously, it'll be very popular and a big release this year. But yes, that's next. Well, it opens next Friday, or this Friday. But there are screenings at midnight on Thursday night, which I'm going to. So in similar vein to The Force Awakens, I'm going to the midnight screening, which means I will be able to give my views on it at the next podcast recording. Also opening on Friday is Demolition, which is a drama starring Jake Gyllenhaal, which I guess is going to get slightly buried by the release of Captain America: Civil War.
Woohoo! More superhero movies.
Yeah, I can barely contain. I know. Wait, I can. So,
Which I think this might be it for a bit though. After this one, there's Doctor Strange in I think it's November. I think we've had most of the big... Suicide Squad, that's the other big release in August, which actually I'm also looking forward to. That looks like it might be quite good fun. Yeah, they seem to have been crammed into the first sort of quarter of the year or third of the year, to be honest, in terms of release dates, with the rest of the year being, left to more traditional summer blockbusters like Independence Day Resurgence or...
I will probably go to the cinema to see that. I'll be honest with you. I hate myself for knowing that I probably will as well. But, it is what it is.
Blu-ray releases, I guess this is just for us ones that still like Blu-ray, not like Mark, who's now a snob and will only have Ultra HD, HDR releases. But what's coming out in normal Blu-ray, Steve?
Yeah, I'd like to see the Ultra HD Blu-ray with HDR of The Professionals from 1978. We've got the Krampus, which is a horror/comedy film set at Christmas with a monster that actually came out obviously just before Christmas last year. And apparently it's quite good. I haven't seen it, but I'm looking forward to reading Simon's review because it's something that does interest me. There's Ip Man 3, sequel to obviously Ip Man 1 and 2, Asian martial arts film, which Kaz is reviewing. And The Professionals, that's the TV series with Bodhi and Doyle. I think Simon's reviewing the third season.
It'll be Simon reviewing that one.
Yeah, Simon reviewing that.
Is that really the Blu-ray release?
Well, The Professionals was shot on film. So in fact, what people probably you probably think, 70s, blah, 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 but shot on film. So they can look bloody good with it cleaned up nicely and have a really, certainly the first two seasons, apparently from what Simon said, look stunning on Blu-ray. So yes, they can have a Blu-ray release, Mark.
Also, there aren't that many really ropey special effects. It was mostly live action. Yes. So, if you've wanted to see someone hooning around in a Capri,
somersaulting over the bobbies.
in glorious 1080p. This is your opportunity.
And who doesn't want to see that? Come on.
And of course, in the 70s, there was empty cardboard boxes lying everywhere.
Yeah. It was
Unfortunately,
before recycling.
The Professionals as a TV series, which I did enjoy when it was on TV, in the late 70s, early 80s, has forever been ruined for me by the comic strip film The Bullshitters, which really absolutely nailed the Professionals in terms of, the cliches and everything. And so after that piss take, you really can't watch it now without thinking about The Bullshitters. So
it's worth it. It's worth it just for the I can't remember which episode it is, but someone makes a half-mile pistol shot.
Yes, there was a new scope, wasn't there, or something?
It's ridiculous.
Special sight.
Yeah, and then presumably special arms.
No, they're running around the Bullshitters with just in their pants and like cowboy boots and jackets, which is kind of taking the open shirt approach of the Professionals to the extreme, which I think really nailed. Certainly, shall we say, Martin Shaw's? Was it Martin Shaw, wasn't it? His approach to the performance. Although I always had a soft spot for the late Lewis Collins.
Was he Bodie or Doyle? I can't remember.
He was Bodie.
Bodie, yeah.
Doyle was the sort of sensitive one.
All things being as they are relative. He was sensitive for a male character in a 70s.
In a 70s TV series, yeah.
He'd probably wait until the second date to slap you. I don't know. The only thing I would say is that whilst I take on board Steve's comments that that actually it could brush up quite well for Blu-ray, it isn't right unless you're watching it letterboxed and de-res to within an inch of its life, a long way down the dial on satellite television. That's how these programs look to me these days, with like 8 lines of picture. But I guess that's sentimentality over common sense.
We won't mention vinyl here.
Yeah.
Right, so that's Blu-rays, and for the snob on the podcast, what can he go and get on Ultra HD Blu-ray, Steve?
There's been quite a few announcements in the last couple of weeks as far as Ultra HD Blu-ray goes. So Sony, who've obviously already started releasing discs, have announced Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2 for release in June. Paramount have announced their first titles, so they've got in June as well Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness coming out on Ultra HD Blu-ray, obviously to time in with the release of Star Trek Beyond, which comes out in the summer, third film. And I'm guessing we'll probably see Star Trek Beyond as a day-and-date release on Ultra HD Blu-ray when that comes out later in the year. Universal have also announced their first Ultra HD Blu-rays. They're doing in the summer Lone Survivor and Everest. They've also announced they'll be doing a day-and-date release of Jason Bourne, the new Jason Bourne movie, when that comes out on disc. So that's good news. Fox, The Revenant comes out day and date this week, the week of recording, so last week in terms of listening to this podcast. In the States, at least, it doesn't come out to the UK until June, but that's a day and date release on Ultra HD Blu-ray, and that should look absolutely stunning. That was shot at 6.5K, finished at 4K. I saw it at the cinema; it looked amazing. So that should look incredible on Ultra HD Blu-ray. Deadpool is also coming out day and date in May, early May, on Ultra HD Blu-ray, and this is good news for you, Ed. They've announced Independence Day for Ultra HD Blu-ray, both the theatrical cut and the director's cut in HDR, and with a DTSX soundtrack. So this is the first disc that Fox have released with an immersive audio soundtrack. And Warner Brothers have already announced Batman vs Superman for July in Ultra HD and HDR as well. So that basically means that in terms of studios, the only studio now that has not announced anything relating to Ultra HD Blu-ray, or for that matter, anything relating to immersive audio, is Disney. Unfortunately, that's the studio that owns Pixar and Lucasfilm and Marvel, but they're the one holdout now. Everyone else is at least on the bandwagon. In terms of players, the UB900 that we mentioned earlier in this podcast, that was the first player to be officially certified as Ultra HD Premium, but the Samsung K8500 is also going to be certified as Ultra HD Premium. Apparently, it will require a software update, so I'm not quite sure. What I don't know, and I'm trying to find out, is what exactly the criteria is. Because if you look at the distribution criteria that were announced by the UHD Alliance, basically any Ultra HD Blu-ray would meet those criteria easily. So I'm not quite sure there's some new criteria, or whether it's just basically have to be 4K, support EOTF 2084 and HEVC and the basic requirements that any Ultra HD Blu-ray could do anyway. But there may be some other criteria attached to the certification program, but I'm trying to find out.
Okay, just a quick one. The second wave of discs, Steve, and obviously first wave from some studios. How many of those are Dolby Vision?
Absolutely none.
Okay, I guess that sounds loud and clear.
At least absolutely none, as far as I'm aware. I haven't seen any announcements at all about Dolby Vision discs from either Dolby or any of the studios. Which is, you're right, Phil. Interesting that there's a distinct lack of any kind of support aside from Netflix HDR, which I believe is Dolby Vision. Although Mark might comment on this better, but obviously, you're using a Sony TV, so you'd be watching an HDR10 anyway.
Yeah. Well, there's no mention of Dolby Vision on it. Just says
No.
HDR.
Is there? It just says HDR, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Very interesting. We'll have to keep an eye on the Dolby Vision thing and see, because in the UK there's only LG at this moment in time who have said that they're gonna have it in any form, shape or form. So interesting stuff. So I think we all went out on Monday. Obviously we record this on a Friday. Did we all go out and buy Star Wars? Because I did. I haven't watched it yet though.
Yeah, I bought it. I haven't watched it. There was an offer in Sainsbury's. If I spent over £30, I got it for £12. And as I've got some
£3 off.
Various bits of AV
trousers
to get
through Blu-rays.
Yeah, let's not go supermarket again, please.
I take it, Mark.
No, I bought it, but I haven't watched it.
No, I haven't. I'm waiting to do. I know where I'm going to buy it from, and I'm going to buy it with a bunch of games and things. Anyway.
Okay, cool. Hodge?
Nope, waiting.
Ultra HD Blu-ray.
Yeah.
You might have a long wait.
I might have a long wait, but I'm prepared.
Yeah, I think you're going to have a really long wait. Or they could release it on Blu-ray again with HDR. Yeah.
Let them know. Let Disney know that you're going to, I don't know, not shave or cut your hair or something until such time as they relent and do it, and you can just stage the process over Twitter.
Just a dirty protest over Twitter.
I wasn't suggesting a dirty protest.
That would be my 200 followers.
No one will know the difference, Mark.
We'll get some
right now.
Ooh, at least you can do that, Mark. I mean, I like to see Steve doing a shaved head protest.
Yeah, but I'm going really grey now, so I don't really want to grow my hair.
That's why I shaved my hair.
Yeah, it's just started happening.
I'm pretty grey, but I just have lots of hair and just accept it. Silver fox. Got a grey beard as well. If I let that go,
Would that count as a
mine's
protest?
ginger.
I won't use Grecian 2000 until this is released.
I don't know. Got to do something. If you're 4K obsessive, that as Steve says, they're the holdouts. So, Mark, direct action. That's what you got to do.
Yeah, I think Disney are the Sony of the film studio. Well, actually, Sony have that analogy just does not work.
Get your ass out to Disneyland, and then once you're inside the park, strip down to your pants and reveal that you just got like 4K or nothing on your permanent marker written all over yourself.
You see, they did this with Blu-ray as well, though. They couldn't just release Blu-ray; it had to be Disney Blu-ray, and had to have a different logo and all the rest of it. I don't know what's wrong with that. They have to have their own thing. It has to be their own thing. Do it their own way. Which is why I was trying to make an analogy like Sony, because Sony like that. They're so stubborn.
Yeah. No, it's doubly annoying because Disney they do take really good care of their assets. They restore their movies. They do, when they do get around to doing the discs, do some bloody good discs. I mean, they did some of the best laser discs ever back in the day. Some great DVD releases, some really, really top drawer Blu-ray releases. So you just know that when they do finally pull their fingers out and get round to it, it's going to be fantastic. But they just need to get on with it, and there seems to be this reticence on their part to actually join in with new formats until they've been established, which is an approach Lucasfilm certainly took back in the day as well. I mean, they wouldn't release Star Wars on DVD for ages and ages and ages, and then the same for Blu-ray. Unfortunately, in those cases, I don't think they were worth the wait. Whereas at least, I'm hopeful that Disney will deliver the goods eventually. It's a bit of a shame you guys haven't watched the Blu-ray of The Force Awakens. If only to comment on the soundtrack, which has had some criticism, I noticed, on some of the threads. People complaining it was underwhelming. I actually thought it was great. I think maybe there's a misunderstanding between what I would consider to be a subtle and effective soundtrack and one that goes boo from behind you a lot. I thought it was a really good mix, nice and effective, but whilst not being too overt. So I guess there's different opinions. But,
well, see, Steve, I'm working on the projector roundup for the Euros and the Olympics, so I can't watch it on my reference system at the minute, which is why I haven't watched it. And there's no way I'm going to degrade it by putting it through. Certainly the Dell projector that I'm reviewing at the minute, my God, that's just awful.
Actually, do you know what? I've had a really good month for reviews. I've had two excellent products and one which is technologically fascinating. So you have my sympathies, but if in karmic balance, I'm having a great time. So
Sounds like Marcus as well, by the sounds of it. He's
yeah,
dragged away from the TV.
we've just shoveled all of the tat onto Phil, and then we're living it up. It's brilliant.
Oh, don't worry, I'll get my own back, and you know I will.
I'm sure that retribution will be swift and from a clear blue sky.
But anyway, why don't we wrap up the podcast by quickly coming up with some of our favourite film soundtracks off the top of our head, and that's sound design as opposed to music score, and why we think that. And I'm going to kick this one off because there's always the same ones that I go to, and there's still a mix that stands out head and shoulders above some of the mixes that we get these days, and that's Jurassic Park. That was, I think they took the extra care with that as well, because that was the launch title for DTS. It was the first ever DTS soundtrack in a cinema. They really went to town with that as well, because if I remember correctly, I think they gave away the equipment to a lot of the chains, so the screens were DTS ready. So undercutting Dolby by giving the stuff away and releasing the film, and you could only show it if you had DTS equipment as well, which meant that every cinema had to have this equipment installed. In terms of a sound mix, I still think it stands head and shoulders above some of the dross that's out there, because it's just such a dynamic track and such a thoughtful track, and the way that they've mixed things together, and the whole bass thud of the T-Rex and the water ripple, that still stands in the memory 20 odd years after the film came out. It was nearly 25 years, isn't it?
Yeah,
93, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Interesting.
23 years.
So that one really stands out for me. Other one, Empire Strikes Back. I still think that is a classic sound mix. There are so many sound effects in that soundtrack that nowadays you just know. I could tell you which sequence it was from, which frame it was from. I've heard it so many times, and it's such a great mix. So for the older ones, probably those two really stand out. Although The Abyss, I think, is a really underrated.
The
I
moment
would
that
kill
you
for
add
that on
water to
Blu-ray.
something is absolutely it's a ticket to start doing some really cool things. On that subject, one of my favourites across all manner of media for the attention that went into it is Das Boot. Which is
yes.
essentially because there's constant activity in that soundtrack, and it's never there to distract you or for shock and awe. Well, except when it requires a degree of shock and awe, but there's water moving through things. You can just hear pumps and generators, and it's someone put an enormous amount of care and attention, well, as they did with the whole film. It's really, really carefully done, and yeah, I mean it's one of my favorites. It's really clever. And in terms of the sheer joy of it, the rivets flying around scene is just still magnificent.
One thing that Matt Wood raised in his interview with Steve, and that was the animated series that they do, the Star Wars, Clone Wars, and Rebels. And of course, when you got animation, you have to make every single sound, because you're not filming in the real world where you can pick up sound off a sound stage and that kind of thing, and then replicate it for your mix and that kind of thing. You have to make everything from scratch. And for me, I think the best people doing this was Gary Rydstrom. Did Toy Story 1 and 2. And Toy Story 2, the opening of that film, is phenomenal, the sound mix.
Who did Finding Nemo?
I think it might have been Rydstrom again. And
because, I mean, obviously the tank tapping.
Getting water.
Yeah.
The tank tapping sequence.
Yeah.
Was,
but the Pixar seal of gold for me, though, in terms of soundtracks like that, is WALL-E.
Yeah, that was really one of my choices, actually.
Yeah,
because that film borders on being a silent movie. I mean, for the first 20 minutes there is absolutely no dialogue, and it's entirely sound design, and it's absolutely brilliant.
But it's so emotive as well.
Yeah,
you're trying to get those emotions.
I think WALL-E's a work of art, and I don't use that term lightly.
Yeah,
I think it's absolutely brilliant.
In terms of sound design, sound mix, and actually making you feel for a character just through the use of sound and images, it's what cinema is. Like you say, it's like a silent film. It is absolutely phenomenal. Yet you know exactly what's going on. You know what's going through his head. You know what's going through her head. You know everything about the characters just through what you're watching and what you're listening to. It really is phenomenal.
I've got an old school favourite of mine, which is Terminator 2. I think that's a phenomenal sound mix, and has been mixed in multiple different formats over the years, but that's always been a favourite of mine. A couple of left field choices. I really like the sound mix from the original Hunger Games. I think that's got a really good sound design, particularly when they're in the actual Hunger Games section itself, when they're in the forest. It's really immersive and atmospheric. And I really like, I mean, I know we use it a lot for testing contrast performance and shadow detail, but I really like the soundtrack on Sunshine. Hang on, the soundtrack on Sunshine is, I think, really good as well. Very directional. The bits when the whole ship's creaking because it's heating up, you get all these creaks coming from all the surround speakers and all around you, and that's really immersive and effective too. I really like that. And as of the more recent soundtracks, an Atmos example, Mad Max Fury Road is just balls to the wall, dialed up to 11 the whole time, but it is pretty impressive.
The problem I have, from my perspective, when this was on the running order, is as a music person, I've had to discount a huge number of them, because for me it's always been as much about the score as it is the effects. I think that we have discussed in the past that film soundtracks can make or break how we perceive something to be. So just as the nature of things, almost all of my sort of favorites have got a really cracking score worked into them as well. And I find that people that do really clever things with the same, basic structure of music and do radically different things depending on what's going on at different times and in the film. I mean, obviously Inception stands out as one of the truly extraordinary examples of that, but there are plenty of others. It's a funny old one. I mean, in terms of, say, Das Boot stands out for me as one of the ones where, although it does obviously have a score, it's somewhat secondary to the actual artistry of what they were doing. But almost everything else I can think of, it's always going to be about that, and it's hard to separate just images on screen from and the effects therein from also just working a score into it. And I guess that's always going to shape my choices.
One of the best ones for me, Ed, along that vein, and what really worked, and again it used original music as well as classic music from that period in time, was Almost Famous. I thought that was really well done. Cameron Crowe's really good with his sound mixes and his sound design as well, because the other one that really stands out for me, not only the use of contemporary music but also score and mixing it together, and that was Vanilla Sky, which was fantastic, because a lot of the story was actually told through some of the contemporary music at the time. Yes.
I mean, another, in terms of historical example where it's done very well, is Rush, which works in some good 70s barnstormers with a really, really excellent Hans Zimmer score. That for me is, I mean, again, actually in effects terms as well, I always think that's an extraordinarily solid piece of work. If you listen to the sort of final race sequence in the wet at Fuji / wherever it was in the UK, the movement of water through and across the cars, you can hear it sort of sluicing through stuff. That's superb, but it's just completely blown away by the pieces of music that are attached to it. And I mean, I've held off from actually putting that on an offline playlist on my phone or any devices, because I sense I'd probably do something wildly illegal driving to that. So you've got to be careful. Well, another one that stands out like that with the use of music, and it's such a strange use of music that it really stands out, and that's Kubrick with Clockwork Orange. Because you can think of certain sound effects and certain sound cues from that, and it just sticks out, and you know it instantly which film it is. Yes.
Yeah, he did the same thing to a degree with 2001, where he juxtaposed, all these sort of high-tech sci-fi images with spaceships, etc., with classical music, and basically turned things like the docking sequence into with the Blue Danube into a space ballet. Effectively, was quite effective. Plus, in that film particularly, he had the real courage to actually present space as it is in real life, as in there's no sound. So that's a soundtrack where the absence of sound is almost as important as actually having sound. So there's whole sequences where there's no sound at all. All you can hear is the person's breathing, because that's the only sound that there would be. And I think that took real courage to do that, because most films avoid that whole thing of there being no sound in space by having sounds, basically, because it's very tricky otherwise to have a quite completely silent film. But Kubrick had the courage and perhaps the genius to say, that's how sound is, that's how we're going to do it, and we'll find ways of doing it in a creative and interesting way.
Gravity was a bit like that at the start, wasn't it, as well?
Yeah.
That was really
Well,
good.
there's one of the discs I've got, I can't remember which version it is. There is an actual version where you can watch it without any of the music score and just watch it with the sound effects of the sound as you would hear it. I can't remember which version that was now. I think it may have been the 3D disc that had that option.
But for a directional soundtrack, I don't think there's anything. That is the most directional soundtrack I've ever seen in my life. I mean, the sounds are always relevant to where the camera's pointing, and it's a really, really good test of how tonally balanced your system is, because there are sounds moving around the sound field all the time.
And some of the best soundtracks I've actually heard have come from Asian cinema, Mark Botwright. Some really nice use of sound in stuff like there was a lot of crossover titles like Hidden Dragon and so on, but I know you're a bit of a fan of Asian cinema, so what are the ones that maybe we haven't heard and we should look out for?
The one that I always go back to, I'm afraid it's a bit of an obvious one, but Akira is fantastic. It was actually one of the first animations where they actually matched the animation to the dialogue already recorded, whereas traditionally it had been done the other way around. But it's just got great use of traditional instruments, and it kind of links together in the same way that Disney used, say, musical cues for sound effects. It kind of merges them together in certain places. As Ed was saying, it's tough to define the crossover between sometimes the score and, say, the sound effects, because it's all part of a kind of cohesive sound design in a perfect scenario. And Akira, it's just a kind of barnstorming Blu-ray, and the noise of the motorbikes, it's kind of very directional in places. It's got kind of nice use of silence as well in different scenes, but very, very powerful score.
Well, the sequence with the walking tank in Ghost in the Shell is another classic example of working effects and music together. So where one ends and the other begins is quite tricky, but it's absolutely fantastic.
And Hodge, I mean, you only watch one film nowadays, which is Kingsman, so...
That's my favourite.
Got a good sound mix, though.
That's got a really good sound mix, actually. Gravity, as I mentioned before, it's a bit obvious, but it is a really excellent sound mix, very very directional. I'd love to hear that in Atmos, but I've heard it in True HD, which sounded fantastic at 7.1 setup. Everest, my memory's not very good, so these were quite recent. Everest has got an excellent, really atmospheric mix, and that Blizzard is just an incredible experience. Best Bullets, I can remember Sicario, that's got a really great mix.
So it's anything recent, really.
Yeah, it's all I can remember. And plus, you got to remember, I've not had a surround setup fully all the time for the last 6-7 years, so it's really going back into the memory banks. And there's one of the Bourne movies that's got a scene in the jungle. I can't for life remember which one it is, but that's a really terrific atmospheric jungle mix with all the sounds of nature going on around, and then there's a big deluge of a tropical rainstorm. Basically, that's pretty stunning, and that's the 4 I wrote down. 2 minutes before the podcast started.
And then there's another one apart from Jurassic Park that I know so well that it just kind of washes over me now, and that's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I've probably seen that sequence, and King Kong. I've probably seen those sequences so many times that I couldn't give you an exact number. What about you, Steve?
I have certainly the opening sequence from Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I've watched that a lot because it is a very a superbly layered sound design that builds slowly, and it's a great test for any sound system or speakers. And one I will mention just at the end, because I think it's probably one of the films that really started the whole concept of sound design along with Star Wars, was Apocalypse Now, with Walter Murch's wonderful work on that, where again they combine classical music in certain scenes with very effective sound design. I think it was the first film to have stereo surrounds when it was released in '79, and that's always a great. But the opening sequence when the helicopters are going around the room is pretty cool for a start. And I know it's a favourite of yours, Ed, isn't it? Isn't it your favourite film actually?
Yes, it is. In as much as I just adore it, but I equally it's not a film I watch terribly often. I mean, not least because you need to have an entire afternoon free, which is hard with a 2-year-old. But yeah, I adore it. But that said, I mean, I quite liked Heart of Darkness as well, which I think firmly stakes me into the weird camp. But you knew that anyway.
And of course, There was, I mean, you just mentioned there, late 70s when Dolby Stereo came along, and then obviously separating out the surrounds, although there were mono surrounds, there was a lot of tricks that they used and so on. But we tend to forget that during the 50s, the real heyday of cinema, when you had the launch of CinemaScope and the real fight back against TV becoming a big thing in people's homes, there was a lot of multi-track use back then, a lot of magnetic track use. You had 6-7 channel mixes for things like Ben-Hur and what was the other big movie, The Robe, and there was a few others that had multi-channel mixes back then, back in the 50s.
Discrete channels as well, weren't they?
Yeah.
There was proper 6-channel mixes. Lawrence of Arabia, I think. Any of the big 70mm roadshow releases would have had a absolutely stonking soundtrack, which means they can be translated quite well to modern technology.
They can indeed, and I keep getting told this story about Earthquake at the cinema. I mean, Steve, you'll be old enough for that. I can't remember it.
Sense around.
Yeah, I can't remember it, but I keep getting told the stories from my gran, who used to obviously work in the local cinema for many years, and you rented the film, but they also brought the subwoofers along.
Yeah, they did. That was their sense around. So I think it was still a mono mix, but it had a massive
LFE channel.
Yeah, massive LFE channel, and that's and then they would come around to the cinema with a whole bunch of subs, shove them in every corner, and then crank it up to 11 when they were playing the film, which obviously in the earthquake sequences was quite effective. There were a few sense around movies released. I think Roller Coaster was one, and the Battlestar Galactica film, which was basically a cinema release in Europe of the first 2 episodes of the TV series in the States, but that had a sense around mix as well, which you can get on Blu-ray. There's basically it's mono with an LFE track, so you can still actually experience how it was originally intended.
My favourite, there's the 70s remake of Earthquake, and there's that photo that does the rounds from time to time. A really big poster was put up somewhere in West London, which lasted about 8 minutes before someone adulterated it, so it read "Fartquake, an earth-shattering experience," which I just think sums up the British pretty much perfectly.
Right, and on that bombshell.
That's
it for the podcast this week. My thanks to Mark Botwright.
Morris doesn't like it, and I don't like it either.
Mark Hodgkinson.
Your lips would make a lollipop too happy.
Steve Withers.
This stage is no place for your personal shit, man.
And Ed Selley.
I will die for you. And he did. Sorry.
Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Bookmark AVForums for latest reviews, news and video. And of course, leave us those 5-star ratings. We did promise this week, but then we forgot. On iTunes, and we'll read your name out at the end of the show.
If nobody dies, we'll read your stuff out.
Yeah.
I mean, I know in 2016 that's a bit of an if, but we'll see how we go.
I'm Phil Hinton. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next Monday.